Hello friends and welcome back to the first revision series of the JIGL subject. Now we are continuing with chapter 3. I have classified chapter 3 as 3A and 3B. In 3A we have completed the interpretation of statutes and in 3B we are doing the General Clauses Act. Now this classification is done solely by me for the purpose of easier studying, but all in all chapter 3A and 3B all forms part of the same chapter, that is chapter number 3 in your JIGL textbook. Now, for those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Anuja, and I've been a teacher of the Company Secretary course for the past 8 years. And I have devised this revision series with two main objectives in mind. The first one is that this revision series is going to be entirely in English, and the second objective is that this revision series will be sticking as close as possible to the ICSI module while having a full coverage of all the topics in the ICSI module. So, if you wish to have access to the notes that I am referring to in the video before you, then simply go to the description below, access the instructions, follow the instructions, and you will be able to get access to the notes that I am referring to. Now, let's start. We are starting with chapter 3B, that is the General Clauses Act. Okay, so what exactly is this General Clauses Act and why exactly are we studying it under the interpretation of statutes? What we have studied so far is that until now, the principles of interpretation or interpretation itself does not have any particular law that applies to it. It is all a series of principles or its aids to interpretation. These are the only two things that really apply in terms of interpretation. However, this General Clauses Act is also known as the Interpretation Law. Okay, so what exactly is this General Clauses Act? Well, at the time that they started drafting the laws, they found one simple problem with respect to all the laws that were being drafted. The problem was that words were required to be defined again and again and again across all the laws that were being drafted. Now, say for example, if we needed to define the word year, or if we needed to define the word India. Now, the word year or India will all have the same definition regardless of which law it applies to. And hence, they found this as a problem because in every law, the same words kept getting repeated again and again and again. And so, therefore, they passed the General Clauses Act. As the name itself suggests, it's a general. That means it applies to everything generally. Clauses refers to certain provisions which are standard across any kind of concept that you come across in law. And this is known as the General Clauses Act. So, what is the objective of this law? It is the main objective is to provide one single law as a composite structure in defining different provisions. Again, defining different provisions with regards to the interpretation of words and certain legal principles which would be defined for various rules and regulations. So that means whether I'm referring to the Transfer of Property Act or whether I'm referring to the Contract Act or whether it is with respect to negotiable instruments, doesn't matter. Some principles that are there in this General Clauses Act will apply standardly and uniformly to all of them. So think of it like a referencer or like a dictionary of sorts where you keep referring back to this and checking whether this principle applies. Now, if you have to see the history of the General Clauses Act, we have the Interpretation Act of 1850. Then in 1868, the first General Clauses Act was passed, and then in 1897, the second General Clauses Act was passed. So right now, what we are following is the General Clauses Act of 1987. My bad. I think this is 1897. Please correct that. The General Clauses Act belongs to what we call a set of interpretation statutes, and it basically lays down how courts should interpret provisions of laws of Parliament. Basically, how should the courts interpret laws passed by Parliament? And it defines, its main objective is that it defines words or expressions so that there is no unnecessary repetition in the definition of these words. So, all in all, I can classify General Clauses Act as having two main objectives. Okay, and what are those two main objectives? One is that it defines certain words that will be standard across any law that you come across, not just the General Clauses Act. And the second objective is that it defines certain principles which will again be consistent and uniform across any law that is being applied. Okay, so which laws does the General Clauses Act apply? Does the General Clauses Act apply only to a few laws, or does it apply to all the laws, or is there some exception that we need to worry about? For this, we look at all the General Clauses Act applies to all those central acts which are acts of the Indian Parliament. Basically, if our legislature has passed that law, then the General Clauses Act will also apply to it. Now, our parliament came into existence only when the constitution came into existence, and that is in the year 1950. So, what about all those laws that were passed prior to 1950? So, that is why they're saying any acts of the Dominion legislature passed between 15th August 1947 and 26th January 1950. What are these dates? These dates are the dates of between our actual independence and the time that our Constitution of India came into force. So this period of three odd years is the period during which we got independence and when our constitution came into force. So during this period, if any laws were passed by our Dominion legislature, then our General Clauses Act will apply to that also. Now, what happened to all those laws that were passed prior to 1947? Well, acts passed by the commencement of the Constitution by the Governor General in Council or the Governor General acting in legislative capacity. Basically, anything that happened prior to the commencement of the Constitution. Okay, so it in a way applies to every law that is applicable today. In short, all right. So now, what exactly are we looking at with respect to the General Clauses Act? Now, I'd like to note one thing in your study material. If you see, if you come down to the word definitions, okay, there are section 3 provides multiple definitions in this particular topic. Now, all these definitions will be these two sections are something that we're not touching upon. We will be starting out with this revenues of central government or of any state government. So what exactly is this? We will look at it individually. Now, first things first. Again, you need to remember that everything that we are studying in the General Clauses Act is a set of principles that will apply to all in any laws. Okay, so the very first concept that we're looking at is revenue. Revenue to the central government or state government. Now, what do you mean by revenue to the central or the state government? It refers to any kind of money paid to the center or to the state. Anything which is in the form of revenue to the government. Now, please understand when we say revenue, it can be in the form of penalties, taxes, fines, confiscations, or any other such form of revenues that the government is getting. Now, when this government is getting revenue, it has to go into a particular account. Now, as the people, we are not exactly aware of where this money is going or which account it is specifically going into. But all we know is that the RBI is the one maintaining the bank accounts for the central government and the state government. Now, this would cause a lot of confusion if we had to find out where exactly the money is going or which account it is going into, or if the account number has changed. And there's a lot of confusions with respect to that. So, what the General Clause that comes and says is okay, in Indian law, if there is any reference to the revenue of the central or the state government, then we will assume that that money has gone into the consolidated fund of India. This is if it is at the national level, or it has gone into the consolidated fund of the state, which is obviously at the state level. So we are not worried about which bank account it went into or which fund it has gone into. Any revenue of the government is presumed to have gone into the consolidated fund of India or the consolidated fund of state. So this is the first thing we're looking at with respect to General Clauses Act. Now, the second concept is a concept that is known as repeal. Now, what do you understand by repeal? Let's understand this. Let's say that we have a law. Now, a law is initially created. I'm using the word created over here, even though we can say that it was passed. A law is created by the legislature, correct? Now, can the legislature also amend the law? The answer is yes. Can it give any clarifications to law? The answer is again yes. Now, can it remove the law? The answer is yes. And this removal is what we call as a repeal. Okay. Now, what we need to understand is that when a law comes into force, okay, when a law comes into force, there are multiple things that a law will basically entail. Okay, so what exactly are they? Let's say, for example, the same law has the capability of giving rights as well as remedies. Okay, and in these remedies, we can say that the law can also give punishments, it can authorize investigations, and many other such things. It really depends on the law that we're talking about. Now, if it is a law with respect to Maternity Benefit Act, it will be completely different from, say, the Right to Information Act. Or every single law is different, and every law is bringing into existence multiple activities which are taking place. So when a law is created, all of these get created. Someone will get rights, someone will get benefits, someone will get remedies, someone will get punished. Before they get punished, there will be an investigation, there will be a court proceeding, or there are multiple things happening in a law. So ultimately, when a law gets repealed, the question then becomes, what happens to all those rights? What happens to those remedies? What happens to those punishments, and what happens to those investigations? Now, for this, let's look at it from the point of view of one single example. Let's say that we have an example law, that is XYZ Act, that was passed in the year 1971. Now, under this law, a Mr. Varun was punished, wherein he had to pay a penalty of rupees 50,000 for a violation under this XYZ law. Now, this law was passed in the year 1971. Let's say this penalty was, Mr. Varun was punished in the year 1995. Now, let's fast forward to the year 2000, and the XYZ Act of, say, 1971 now stands repealed. Okay, so our Indian government has come and repealed this law in the year 2000. Now, in the year 2000, Mr. Varun now approaches the court of law, and Mr. Varun is now saying that, see, I was penalized for I was punished for a particular offense under this law, and I would like my money back. I paid 50,000 rupees as a penalty, and now this since this law is repealed, it is no longer in existence. I would like my money back. Now the question is, can that happen? Should the government refund the penalty? Obviously, the answer is no. Any penalty already paid is done, it's gone. You can't go up to the government and say, see, now the law no longer exists, and so give me back my money, or give me compensation for any punishments that I received before. Okay, this is one example. Now, let's continue this example into, instead of a penalty, okay, let's say the investigation is still ongoing. The investigation is ongoing at the time of repeal. So that means the authorities are investigating this person and has not yet started proceedings against this person at the time that this law stands repealed. Now the question is, what happens to this investigation? Does it come to a stop? Does it continue? Can you punish a person after the investigation, even though the law no longer exists? Well, to answer these questions only, we have the next section, that is effect of a repeal. Now, this section is coming to clarify the position, to specify what really happens when a repeal takes place. Okay, so let's read it. If any if the General Clauses Act or any central act or regulation repeals any enactment, then unless a different intention appears, okay, so unless the law specifically says that all investigations will come to a stop, all penalties will be forfeited, all of unless it's clearly mentioned like that, then this section will apply. So what is that section? One, the repeal, the repealed law. So in this example, we're talking about the XYZ Act. The repealed law will not revive anything not in force or existing at the time which the repeal takes place. What does this mean? Let's look at it this way. Let's say, for example, the same XYZ Act of 1971. Now, as you all already know, sometimes if there is an act of 1971, then the parliament can delegate the power to a certain authority to form rules. Okay, and the thing is, the XYZ Act of 1971 was passed in the year, I mean, it was passed in the year 1971, but the rules were never notified. The rules were never notified. And this situation can happen. The law can be passed, and sometimes the rules will never come into force. However, you can never have a situation where the rules are there in force and the main act is not in existence. Okay, so let's say, for example, let's continue with the example that this 1971 law got repealed in the year 2000. Okay, then can the government go ahead and notify rules relating to the XYZ Act in the year 2001? The answer is definitely no. So let's look at the provision again. Can you, can, if there is any repeal, then the repeal shall not revive anything which is not in force. So the rules are not yet in force, they've not yet been notified, or existing at the time when the repeal takes effect. So you can't revive something which is not existing, which cannot be revived. And so that is what the first provision says. Do not revive anything that is not existing or not in force at the time the repeal takes effect. Then the second provision is saying, affect the previous operation of any enactment so repealed, or anything duly done under or suffered thereunder. Now it's saying that, we said when a law comes into force, it will bring with it rights, remedies, punishments, investigations, authorities, maybe committees, salaries, so many things. And many things would have happened under the law. Investigations would have been started, salaries would have been given, penalties would have been imposed, imprisonments may have been given. Nothing shall stand affected. Anything which was done under the law shall not stand affected. And that is what they're saying. The repeal shall not affect the previous operation of that enactment. Anything that that law did or anything that was done under that law will not be affected, and nothing done or suffered thereunder will be affected. Okay, then they're saying the repeal shall not affect any kind of a right, privilege, obligation, or liability which was acquired, which was accrued, which was incurred under any enactment so repealed. So what did we say? Every time a law comes into force, rights are created, remedies are given, punishments are given. So that is what they're saying over here. It will not affect any rights, privileges, obligations, or liabilities which was acquired or accrued or incurred under the repealed law. So let's say, for example, that a license was obtained under the said law, then this license will continue to have effect, or the benefits of this license will continue to be given to that person unless the law specifies clearly therein. So we have many examples of this, but licenses would be one main example, because a license could have been given under a previous law. And if that law is no longer in force, then the government will come and notify certain rules saying that, okay, this license will be valid only for this time. It will be valid only for 5 more years, and after that, the license will stand cancelled. Or that people will have to come and re register themselves under the new law, and we will give them a period of 1 year's time. So, multiple things like this come up when there is a repeal, because there is a gap between the repeal and the new law. Next, the repeal will not affect any penalty, forfeiture, or punishment incurred for any offenses committed. And for this, we go back to my example. Over here, Mr. Varun, who was punished for a penalty of 50,000 rupees, can he go back to the government and say, give it back to me? The answer is no. And that is why we say that, okay, no penalty, forfeiture, or punishment which was incurred will stand affected. The next one is it will not affect any investigation, legal proceedings, or remedy with respect to such rights or privileges. So, it will not affect any kind of right, liability, privilege, obligation. It will not affect any penalty, forfeiture, or punishment. It will not affect any investigation, legal proceeding, or remedy. And more, then they go ahead to say that any kind of obligation, liability, penalty, forfeiture, or punishment, and such investigations, legal proceedings, or remedy may be instituted, continued, or enforced. And any such penalty, forfeiture, or punishment may be imposed as if the repealing act or regulation had not been passed. So let's take an example for this. Here we said that there is an investigation which is ongoing at the time of repeal. Okay, in our example number 2. So let's look at this. When there is an investigation ongoing at the time of repeal, the question is, does the investigation continue? The answer is yes. The investigation will continue, and as a result of this investigation, punishment can be given. Okay, legal proceedings will continue. And when we say punishment, it can be a penalty, or it can even be a forfeiture of property. Basically, the proceedings will continue as if the repeal never took place. Now, why is this the case? Is because at the time the wrongful activity was done, the law was still in place. And it is only because that wrongful activity was done, the investigation had proceeded. So, assuming that at the time the crime was committed or that offense was committed, the law was in force. But however, while the investigation was ongoing, the law is now repealed, doesn't mean that the investigations come to an end. So even if the law no longer exists, the investigation can continue, legal proceedings can start, and a person can be punished under those legal proceedings. And that is only the effect of a repeal. So if I have to sum up this provision, it is very simple. One, the repeal will not affect, it will not revive anything which is not in force or not existing at the time. It will not affect any the previous operation of any enactment which was so repealed. It will not affect any right, privilege, obligation, or liability. It will not affect any penalty, forfeiture, or punishment. It will not affect any investigation, legal proceedings, or remedy. And any of these which were continuing at the time of repeal will continue as if the law was never repealed in the first place. So a person cannot escape liability simply because the law stands repealed. So if this is clear for you, we can move on to the next one. That is the repeal of an act making a textual amendment in any act or regulation. Now, for this, we need to understand it from a simple example, and the example goes as such. In the world of contract, or in the when the Contract Act was drafted, the concept was that we did not recognize, the Contract Act does not recognize electronic contracts, because the Contract Act was drafted in the year 1871, and at that time the concept of electronic contracts did not even exist. Okay. Now, however, can we discard electronic contracts because of it? The answer is no. So, what exactly happened was the IT Act of 2000 was passed. And as a result of IT Act 2000, it's one of the main objectives of the IT Act 2000 was to make amendments to the Indian Penal Code, the evidence law, and something known as a banker's book evidence. Okay, so when I say it formed amendments to the IPC, the evidence law, and the banker's book evidence. Obviously, we don't have the IPC anymore, it is the BNS now, and the evidence law is the BSA. Okay, so what exactly happened over here is that the IT Act went ahead to amend the Indian Penal Code so as to include offenses committed against a computer. So earlier, the criminal law recognized offenses committed only against a human being. But then, when the IT Act came out, it amended the Indian Penal Code so as to include harm committed against a computer resource too. Then, similarly, even the evidence law, earlier only documentary evidence and oral evidence was given, but now the documentary evidence also includes electronic evidence. So, can you see how one law, the IT Act of 2000, is making a textual amendment in the IPC, in the evidence law, and another law? Similarly, it also went ahead and recognized electronic contracts. This is the basis of your IT Act of 2000. Now, presuming, here is where the example starts. The example is, what if in today's scenario, the IT Act 2000 now stands repealed? Now, if the IT Act 2000 stands repealed, what happens to all the amendments made to IPC, to evidence law? What happens to the recognition of electronic contracts? Do we now remove those definitions from those three laws, or do we allow it to continue? The answer is we allow it to continue, because if the IT Act came and made amendments into other laws, and this IT Act itself got repealed, then all the other laws will continue to work as if this law was not repealed. Which means what? IPC will still punish offenses done against computers. Your evidence law will still accept electronic evidence. So that is the basis of the next topic, and that is the repeal of an act which is making a textual amendment in some other act or regulation. We'll read it. If a central act or regulation repeals any enactment by which the text of such law or regulation was amended. Okay, so IPC was amended, our evidence law was amended. How? Either through inserting words or through removing words or substituting words. Either way, it was amended. Then the repeal shall not affect the continuance of any such amendment and will continue in operation. So this is the clarification that this provision is coming in saying with respect to a repeal of act making a textual amendment in any act or regulation. Now, once a law stands repealed, can it be revived again? The answer is yes. However, if it's being revived again, then the state has to explain the purpose of why they did it. Because the act of passing a law is a huge task. It is very resource intensive. It takes up a lot of time, and there's a lot of effort being put into drafting of laws. So, if a law was repealed for some reason, and then the legislature wishes to revive it back, then they must provide reasons for doing so. Then the next one is, when we're talking about time, how exactly do we compute time? Well, they're saying that if any law states that a document must be submitted within a specific time period. Let's assume that the time period is 30 days. And it so happens that the 30th day falls on a court holiday or a national holiday or some day on which the court is closed. Then we can assume or we can presume that the act of proceeding shall be done as shall be taken as done or done in due time if it was done on the very next day after which the court or office is open. So, in a sense, even though you didn't come on the 30th day, you can still go on the very next day and do your submissions. And this is what they mean by computation of time. Then, most laws will refer to a person as he. Now, just because the law refers to a he, it doesn't mean that the law applies only to the men in our society. He includes she, and singular includes plural. So, just because the law refers to a woman, now, unless the law is about women itself, then he includes she, and if a word is mentioned in its singular form, then it is to be taken as a plural form also. And that is what they're saying over here. Words importing the masculine gender should be taken to include females, and words in the singular manner should also include the plural and vice versa. All right. Now, friends, we're coming to the next topic, that is the power to issue, to include the power to add, amend, vary, or rescind. Now, let's say, for example, some kind of an authority has been given the power to issue licenses. Okay, and let's say issue licenses for trading of gold. Now, just because this authority has been given the authority to issue licenses, we cannot say that he has the power only to issue licenses. We have to presume that he also has the power to cancel, to modify, to vary, or rescind any kind of the anything related to these licenses too. Now, the provision does not speak about licenses. They're talking about any authority which has the power to issue notifications, orders, rules, or bylaws. Now, let me be very clear about this. The power to pass laws, okay, let's clarify this over here. If the power to pass laws vests solely with the parliament or with the state legislature, but remember we spoke about delegated legislation. So if some authority, and let's say in this case the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, has the power to pass the companies under the Companies Act, the rules under the Companies Act. Okay, so if MCA has the power to issue notifications, orders, rules, or bylaws under the Companies Act, then we will assume that they not only have the power to issue, but they also have the power to amend, to vary, to remove, or rescind any one of these orders, rules, or notifications. Because if the parliament has the power to do that, we have to presume that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs should also have the power to do that. Okay, so just because it says power to issue notifications, we cannot go ahead and say that no, this is only the power to issue. It does not include the power to amend, vary, rescind, or remove. The answer is we have to interpret it accordingly. Next is with respect to recovery of fines. Now, the thing is with recovery of fines, what do you mean by recovery of fines? Let's say the judge goes ahead and imposes a fine on a person. And this person simply stands up and says, okay, so what if the judge says all of that? I will not pay the fine. Now, the question is how to recover the fine from him. The answer is it's a little bit difficult. Now, not everybody has access to the police where the police can go and recover the fine from him, or it's not like your income tax officers or your revenue officers who have the power to make a sale of your property and recover the fines. So, since there's some confusion with respect to how exactly the fines are to be recovered, the General Clauses Act is coming in saying, don't worry about it. We already have a working method of recovering fines under the criminal law. Okay, so it was under the erstwhile Indian Penal Code. Since we already have the method of recovering fines under the Indian Penal Code, if anyone else wishes to recover fines under any other law, simply follow the provisions of the Indian Penal Code with respect to recovery of fines, and that is more than sufficient. So there need not be any question as to how fines will be recovered under each separate law. Simply follow the provisions of recovery of fine under your criminal laws. All right. Next, we have provisions as to offences punishable under two or more enactments. Now, we need to clarify that we're not exactly talking about the concept of double jeopardy over here, but rather that a person is to be punished under two separate laws. Okay, under two separate laws, we can say that he's being punished. Now, what exactly can this be? One is that let's we can take an example where a person is guilty of an offense of money laundering. Now, the laws that prohibit, or let's say he's a benami. Now, let's say that this act of money laundering will be punished under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, the PMLA. However, he was a director of the company and he was laundering money through the company, and therefore he will be liable for fraud under Section 447 of the Companies Act. Look how he is being punished under both the Companies Act as well as the PMLA. Two separate laws for the same offense. And that is why they're saying that where any act or omission constitutes an offense under two or more enactments, then the offender shall be liable to be prosecuted and punished under either or any of those enactments, but shall not be liable to be punished twice for the same offense. Now, please understand that he cannot get punished under the Companies Act separately, go to jail for 3 years, come back out, and then again get punished under the PMLA. That is not allowed to happen. But rather, what will happen is that the court will hear both matters together. They will give a punishment once, which means they'll say that okay, you have to serve imprisonment 3 years under this law and 3 years under that law, and it'll be clubbed together. Okay, so that is why they're saying shall not be liable to be punished twice for the same offense. But however, it can be clubbed together and an additional punishment may be given. Okay, then the last is meaning of service by post. Now, anytime anytime a law specifies the word service by post, so where do we see this word service by post is that if the court needs to send notice, or a party wishes to send notice or a summons, etc., the letter will have to be sent across to the defendant or to the other party. Now this activity is done through a service by post. Okay, what do you mean by this? There are certain requirements if you're going to be sending it as service by post. Well, what they're saying is that first and foremost you have to address it to the correct person. Okay, so that means his name, address, and all such details should be clearly given over here. Second one is that it should be posted by registered post only. You can't courier it according to your own wishes. It needs to be sent by registered post only, and it should be prepaid. You cannot send a notice or a summons and then expect the defendant to pay for the post over there, because he can simply say, I won't pay for the post, and then the post will come back, the letter will come back. And so they're saying that, okay, if these three are done properly, if the address is given properly, if it is sent through registered post, and if it is prepaid, then we can say that the service by post has been done properly. Okay, however, a small thing to note over here, the postal services had given out a news stating that the registered post service is going to be removed. We are yet to see how that will affect the operation of multiple services, especially like this, in with respect to our, how post is sent in our country. But essentially, when they say service by post, they're referring to service by registered post acknowledgement due. So, friends, this is the end of your General Clauses Act, and as a general to your chapter number 3, that is interpretation of statutes. Now, for those of you who want a more consolidated form of all the case laws that are available, then the case laws are actually, I have provided the case law sheets for you in a document such as this, where I have given the topic, the case law, and what was the decision held in that particular case law. Now, this will be really helpful for you at the time of studying case laws or to consolidate what was held in each case law. We know that each and every case law is given in a lot of detail in a very technical language, and mostly all of it is not even required. So what you can do is you can refer to these case law sheets. I've given the topic separately, so you can simply refer to that topic. Then the case law is given in the second column, and what you should be writing with respect to that case law in your answer sheets. It's been consolidated to include all of the important case laws under the entire interpretation of statutes chapter. In your General Clauses Act, there is only one case law, that is Balaya versus Rangachari, which has been included in this document itself. Now, if you want access to these case law sheets, then again go to the description below, because I've given detailed instructions on how to access the notes as well as the case law sheets. Go ahead, follow those instructions, and I shall see you in the next video.